Welcome to another edition of Kubernetes Working Group LTS meeting. We follow CNCF code of guidelines. This meeting is recorded, so this is going to be posted on the internet later. Let's dive into the agenda today. I have shared the link in the chat for the meeting agenda. Please add yourself as an attendee. And the first item is survey data. I have last meeting we did on May 14th. I presented a set of slides on. Can you guys hear me? Can anybody confirm?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks, Jordan. So continuing, I presented the survey slides and whatever progress I made there, I have added a couple of more graphs to the slides. And Jordan asked if everybody can get the data. So I think I massaged the data, removing email IDs and respondent IDs and IP addresses from the data. The first link that you see over here in the Google Drive is the data itself. Everybody in Kubernetes Dev should be able to access it. If you can't, let me know. If someone on the call can access the link and confirm if they can access the data, that should be great. The second link is the presentation that I presented, and there are a couple of slides added to it. I can go through them, but I think they speak for themselves. I haven't yet reached a summary with respect to the goals we had with respect to the data. So I'm going to present that next time when I have summarizable points from the data. That's it from me from my side of the agenda. The second item is follow on API compatibility skew tests. Jordan.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. I know at one point we talked about different things we wanted to have in place in order to start solidifying our support across multiple versions. One of those things, you search way down in our meeting minutes, was tests that would catch if we broke compatibility around serialized data formats. And so at the end of the 1.15 release, this got put in place for all of the API types under k8s.io/API. So I linked to the directory that contains those and a README that kind of describes how it works. But the short version is that we now can detect if we have made any changes in a release that would break round tripping of data from previous releases. And so as we cut additional releases, we will grow this corpus of test data for all the formats we support: JSON and YAML and Proto. So this is part of our effort to avoid accidentally breaking release compatibility. And this benefits us whether we add long-term support or not. The goal is to make it so that upgrading from one version to another is never going to break these guarantees.
Do we also support patch release in this? I see the URL is only for 1.14.0. So
I only added it for the major releases.
Minor.
One of the things that this does, it's always testing against the fixtures for the current branch. So if a change gets picked into the 1.14 release branch that would affect compatibility, it would break this unit test against the 1.14 or against the head directory in that branch. So if we find ourselves making changes in patch releases that affect API serialization, which we really, really should not, then we can consider adding folders for patch releases. But this test would detect if we had done that, and we can kind of decide how we want to deal with that if we encounter it. But I don't expect we will encounter it.
Awesome.
Is this going to be on a release blocking test grid board?
This is part of the unit tests. So if
Okay,
this
so
fails,
it's merge blocking. Okay,
it fails merge.
perfect.
Yeah, it's very quick to run. It takes a couple seconds.
Oh,
And
that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah.
And have you seen it? Like, I guess since it's given that it runs there, if somebody encounters a problem and corrects it, we wouldn't necessarily have as much visibility on that. But do you know if it's triggered for anybody yet?
It went
Not that
in at
it's
the end of 1.15 basically. So
yeah.
I actually was running it on the API changing PRs towards the end of the release. I was kind of rebasing it on all of the API changing PRs and verifying that none of them were breaking compatibility.
Okay.
So it hasn't saved us yet, but another thing that it will check, especially around the proto serialization, is when we change our proto libraries, bump to newer versions of those, all of the generated protobuf serialization code gets changed in ways that cannot be code reviewed. And so this lets us keep those dependencies up to date and know that we're not breaking backwards compatibility. So this also ties into the how can we get out of dependency gridlock, and several of our dependencies like etcd and some of the cloud providers really want newer versions of protobuf libraries, which is fine as long as they're backwards compatible. And now we know that they're backwards compatible. So this ties into some of the code organization stuff that Dims was working on. At the beginning of 1.16, we will be upgrading a whole swath of our dependencies to tagged releases and more up-to-date releases. And so this was a prereq for doing that in a non-terrifying, like squint at generated protobuf and hope we didn't break stuff way.
Very cool.
Any questions or comments for Jordan? Going once, going twice. Okay, let's move on to the next topic. George, you want to
So, hey everyone. The next topic on the agenda, release postmortems, is actually an idea that was brought up by Deems in the SIG architecture group. So one of the things that we have noticed is the .o release for most of the .o releases for Kubernetes, they're not actually production ready, and there is a lot of work that has to go in from the patch release teams. A lot of cherry picks that have to be merged in before anyone actually is it's brave enough to run the latest release of Kubernetes. So the idea was to actually try to do some release postmortems, try to gather some data into how many cherry picks, the type of cherry picks are merged into the latest release. To get a better perspective of whether there are things that we can do better during the normal release cycle cadence. And I wanted to bring up the idea in this group. It seems like it's right in your alley, and I wanted to see if this is something that anyone here will be interested in doing. If this is actually the right place to bring it up, or yeah, just fishing for some ideas on how we could possibly go on doing this.
I'm definitely interested. I have data from the last 5 months or 6 months nearly now of being involved on the patch management side, and yeah, I'm interested to see how we can discern trends there and turn that into actions that break the cycle. Although I will say that I'm not convinced the data backs the assertion. the initial assertion being that the .o releases are just not usable for some definition of that. I think we need to dig into that part, but that's where the postmortem will be valuable.
That's that's a good point. Do you have is the data about do you have like organized somewhere something?
Yes and no. So the patch release managers use a spreadsheet to track the state of incoming potential cherry picks, and sometimes that has CVE data in it. So like definitely historical, I can snapshot, but that's also readily available in Git because everything that goes into a given release is there, right? So yeah, and where I say data, I'm talking about like, okay, so we put out .o, what went into .1? How much of those patches imply that something was critically broken in .o? From my perspective, what I'm seeing is for various little, what I'll say is little point things, but for you, it may have been the critical feature that you were looking forward to the release. There have been problems, yeah. And especially as things mature, alpha, beta, stable, there are problems, but are you unable to form a cluster? Are you unable to stand up a cluster at the .o release? Is it just utterly unstable? Does it not scale? Does it not perform? I've not seen that to be the case.
Okay, so yeah, that's always a good thing to hear. So a good action item, the spreadsheet that the batch managers use, could that be made public, or is there some data that rather not?
Well, so say hypothetically today, I know that there's a CVE coming in, that would be in the spreadsheet, but it's not public data. So that's where like I can copy stuff out to show 113 and 114, for example, where the first releases went, but the head of that is something that's potentially sensitive at any moment.
Okay, so I guess a good way of moving forward, just gather the data from Git.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and copy those over and share them too, just the 113 and 114 just to show.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Just really want to see, just get a broad overview and see where we can dig in and just go from there. Other than that, if anybody has any other opinions, comments, I'd love to hear them.
The release.
Can I go?
Go ahead, please.
It occurs to me that something that could explain both of your statements would be that new releases have new alpha features that are waited for, and those are less stable. And so it appears that the new release is less stable, but actually it's the new feature appearing in that release that is less stable. So maybe if you took the data system has and broke it up to say, was this a cherry pick against an existing stable feature, or was it a cherry pick against a new alpha feature? That might answer that question.
Sounds like a good idea.
I think what would help, do we know if whenever there is a .1 or a .2 release, do we see that whatever patches go in, they come in with tests that avoid regression and also test the patch itself? Is there a rule or is there a behavior that we have seen in the past?
There's definitely a guideline that all things coming in always should have that, but practically speaking, no, that doesn't happen. I think some of the SIGs are better than others, but again, that's all in the commit record. As you see a PR, like the cherry pick is usually a fairly isolated thing. If you go up to the parent PR and if there's an issue associated and look at the conversations there, quite often those will have discussion of how did we get here, and okay, we've got this fixed, but can you also write up a test that will prevent it from happening again? And those usually aren't a merge blocking criteria that the test exist, but sometimes they are. So you'd have to kind of case by case go look at all the commits, the parent PR, associated issue if they're there, and kind of there's quite a bit of fan out there to see which portion came with tests either there ahead of the PR merging into master or as a follow-on issue to say, hey, let's add some testing in this area.
Yeah, I just wish there was a mandatory, label that said it requires tests, and then the reviewers can create an exception instead of, reverse the process of, exception versus rule. So right now, not having a test has become an exception rather than a rule. I think as a part of postmortem that would help.
Yeah, makes sense. We'll try to also look for that data.
Yep. George, you have the next. Does anybody else any comments on the postmortem?
So who's owning that, or like what form? Are you asking this work group to step up to that, or SIG release, or SIG architecture, or is this just the FYI that SIG architecture is going to be running with this?
So, so the plan from the SIG architecture side of things is I'll own it as much as possible, but I wanted to see if I wanted to bring the idea to this group to see if anybody else else is interested in, and also to check whether there was already some existing work that could be related or that could be useful to this endeavor. But I'll do my best to keep this moving forward until this group SIG architecture and anyone that's interested gets a good enough idea of what things break releases, what things are stable, if we have if tests actually help, that anything that might just help anyone really.
Okay, I'll bounce you a link once I copy that spreadsheet stuff out, and I can kind of describe how we are managing the flow of patches in, and what I see for trends maybe there a bit, just as a data point. And
Okay.
I'm happy to be involved on an ongoing basis.
Okay, thank you so much. With that, any more questions, or can I move on to the next thing? Going once, twice, thrice. And the next topic is also it's also related to this thing. So I'm well aware that I'm pretty sure that everyone is aware of how the release team works, but current CI signal team, we only really take care of SIG release, informing, blocking, and 115 blocking, informing for right now. 114, 113, 112, all those tests, they just go into the void, and again, like a lot of test grid, at some point they're just gonna become red because nobody's looking at them, no one's really maintaining them. So this one I just wanted to bring the bounce idea with some more people. Will be used from group of people that essentially do CI signal, but for past releases. Also to make also with the goal of trying to help patch managers, so they can actually get a signal, an end-to-end signal of whether a cherry pick actually doesn't break anything or that type of thing. What do you all think?
Yeah, George, this is related to partially what Jordan brought up with the cube cuddle not being in master blocking, correct?
Yeah,
In part, or
yeah, I know. Yeah, in a way. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the cube cuddles, test that Jordan mentioned, that was actually moving a job or a test. I don't remember, from 6CLI test grid dashboard to the secret list dashboard. So for this one, I think that actually just falls under the release team. How do you actually want to graduate tests from one dashboard to the other? But one of the things that I really wanted to see, gauge if there's interest, is on actually maintaining the older release dashboards. For example, the 114, 13, and 12 right now. So in a way, like, expand the CI signal team from the release team to take care of the older releases that we are still looking into and maintaining.
I think this begs the question from patch release team as to how the release team is structured.
Patch release so historically patch release has been a person who for 9 months managed the incoming queue of cherry picks and watched that test grid board and triaged failures there, routed them for fixing as needed. So it was, for the 3 supported branches, it was always these 3 people, and they didn't necessarily communicate a whole lot. So we're trying to shift it more into a team effort. And that's one of the things that's been useful in sort of doing the spreadsheet-based workflow. Like if it's just one person, they have their workflow, it's all kind of anecdotal, but in a Google Sheet, we can share, and we're starting to build up a process of how we triage and manage things that are coming in. And then one of the immediate observations across that is the majority of what comes by is a cherry pick against most or all branches. So having 3 people doing the same triage and decision making, should I merge this, is it healthy, was a waste of effort. We should be communicating across these, and we get a little bit better coverage if we do it as a team as well. So like the patch releases last week, I'd started some stuff, or we'd been communicating all together as a team, watching the things merge and CI on those test boards, going green or staying green with the new commits. I started some stuff building, I went to bed. Poland, the teammate in Poland woke up, did some stuff, they handed back off to me, I handed off to a part to a Googler. So like, instead of one person having to spend the better part of their day making a release, we spread the work out to where it was a set of people. But to do that, we have to have a shared knowledge of the state. Test grid is a part of that, the cherry pick queue and the status of master or the release branch commits is part of that. And GitHub makes this hard. So I actually have tomorrow, I'm going to do a little screen share with the folks at GitHub of what this workflow for triage and kind of merge master, what it looks like, because it's really difficult. So say somebody just goes and flips something, the milestone, or just closes an issue in GitHub. Now it no longer shows up in a query. So unless you knew issue number 7123455 was important and noticed that it's no longer in the query results, it just disappeared. And there's not something that's sort of the stateful queue management process. And so they were interested in understanding that and maybe helping build something. Otherwise, maybe we might build our own Airtable to manage it better. But it's tricky. And definitely, one of the things that is I'm driving sort of this agenda to spread this out into a team, is I don't want all of that state and knowledge tied up in one person. It's a risk to the project. And then also you have the hive mind, as if it's as a team. One person could be like, oh, this is totally cool, but Jordan then will be like, no, you guys are totally missing this. So we benefit when, I mean, everybody knows this, engineering works best in teams, right? So especially when there's a whole bunch of complicated state changing over time. So we're trying to improve that, and it yeah, that's kind of where we are on the patch release side.
So we already do monitor this test grid dashboards when we make the patch. There's no specific CI signal role, but the patch release managers monitor them for the older releases.
For the older releases, yeah. I have I basically always got a window open on those, the boards for 13 and 14 and soon to be 15.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually super helpful. I didn't know that's the way it worked. So expanding, so I guess expanding CI signal, that's just something that the patch managers are gonna take, or is there something that any new contributor that you will think that a new contributor could help in work?
I definitely want more people helping on that. Again, going back to like the more eyes makes the problems more opaque. But right now, so I'm only a couple months into having exercised it myself and come to sort of a sense of what we need. Part of that is kind of declaring or establishing the process of doing this monitoring and triage and patch merging, having it documented so somebody who's new can come in. Because before it was, it was basically a series of Googlers who somehow anecdotally knew how to make the stuff happen. So we've done the discovery. Now we need to kind of refine a collaborative process, because the way one person does it in isolation is different than how a team is going to do it. So we need to establish a process, get that documented, and that'll enable us to bring in new people. But that's the goal, to make this more sustainable over time, that it's not one person burdened for 9 months, and that you get the benefit of team collaboration on triage.
Okay, so for that issue, if I can just close it and make a mention of everything that the patch managers do, at some point you all are going to make this a thing, right? So you guys are the owners of this.
I think that's a fair assessment, yeah. And I'm just trying to find the issue where we're kind of tracking the to-dos on building that team out for patch management.
Okay, awesome. And
so I'll put a link to it in yours if you're closing yours, just to say like, hey, these people and what they're doing will be the forward path.
Okay, thank you so much.
Another point I wanted to make was the 1.x.0 releases, and not necessarily not production ready because there is nobody watching it. I think we don't have enough tests that actually give us always whether what 0.0 is good enough or not. It's that when it goes out in the wild is when we figure out, hey, there is a new issue. And then that's why I think the .1 and .2 releases deserve new tests, because whenever there is a new issue that is not part of the test suite, is found outside the test suite, then you should probably add those tests. So that's why I think there should be a policy that says that whenever we add a new patch, there should be a test to test the patch, and also the fix, also the issue that the patch is fixing.
Yeah, I think that applies generally. Like we should not have the same problem twice.
Yeah.
And so we, like Tim said, different areas are more insistent on this than others.
Yeah.
Even things going into master, bug fixes should be accompanied by tests. But definitely for things that were severe enough to warrant picking back to a release branch.
Yeah, I think if there's a default label in the automation that gets added if it's in bug, and the reviewers, someone else can go and say, okay, I see this and this does not require a test, that would be much easier to remove the label versus under this one. Anyways, yeah, I think that's for the postmortem team.
And this is something, George, that I would really suggest you watch. So your role maybe as CI signal lead on the release team is about to end, but watch really closely the next month and a half. What gets merged back into that branch? What does it tell you about the 115? What did we miss? If you're declaring effectively this week, like we're good to go to release, when you see the patches that come after, do any of them go, oh, we should have caught that, or I'm embarrassed that I said thumbs up before now that I see this patch? Like, so as a release lead, I did that, and I wasn't overly worried by what I saw. I think we have a reasonable, I mean, I'm not happy with the state, the fullness, robustness of it, but we're not having horrible escapes, I don't feel like. But you'll be able to judge that very clearly because you've seen the flow over the last quarter and then over the coming weeks to sort of compare and ask yourself, was I delusional anywhere during that?
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, we'll absolutely do that. And thank you so much for all the conversation around this.
Thanks, Josh, for bringing that to our attention. Yep, I think that's it. I don't think it's got. That next topic is mine. I attended the conformance meeting. I was not at the KubeCon, and the architectures, SIG Architectures Extended Conformance Working Group, or conformance work stream. I don't know what it's called. There's a separate meeting for performance reviews, and during that, the APIs Hippie Hacker presented follow-up discussion of KubeCon EU on what he presented at KubeCon. If you see that there is this particular, I've pasted the minutes of the meeting in the notes. there were interesting discussions around how API Snoop was used to track what are the tests that are untested, but the API endpoints that are exposed versus untested. You can easily see from the link how many endpoints are not being tested and how many endpoints which are stable and not being tested. This is just an example, but they have covered different categories, and this can be used to query. They have also taken up action items to actually file umbrella issues and sub issues under for different API endpoints to be tested. And then also with respect to conformance, to see which of the stable APIs that are stable and are supposed to be upgraded to conformance level needs to be upgraded. So that's a pretty interesting data with respect to how many stable APIs are actually getting tested today versus how do we call it stable. Because I think I found 2 issues in the last release where there was a stable API but was not tested and never used from 1.12, say. One of them was not used from 1.12 and was never working. So it's a good data, and I think I'm gonna delve more onto this to see what action items and how we can connect this with saying, okay, how do we derive the stability of the APIs itself from this data? Saying, okay, when we say something is stable, what should be the process around it? Second is, what is missing today across the system? Apart from what is mentioned in this data, is I've seen that there are, in this release, we had 14 alphas versus 3 betas, versus 3 stable. The number of progressions from alpha to stable is less, and there should be a way to calculate the life of an API. How long is it alpha? And that would be a very important metric to understand. How long does it take for us to, an average time for an alpha feature to go stable? And what do we do with alpha features that are rotting and nobody's taking ownership and they are living there for months and years? So those are some of the important things, data perspective, which I wanted to collect in the future.
A couple of things to call out around trying to tie that to some of the API tests, like the auto-collected data. A lot of the alpha features are modifications to existing types. And so you may be calling a V1 type that has a new alpha feature in progress. And so the auto-collected data isn't going to understand that you're calling V1 pods with alpha fields. Another point is that a lot of the tests we have are unit and integration level tests, and the auto-collected conformance data only understands E2E tests. That was kind of an issue that was raised from the beginning about how the conformance suite is set up. And so we actually have lots and lots and lots of test coverage that is not captured by the scraped metrics or logs around what APIs were exercised in conformance. So just keep that in mind as you're trying to interpret some of the data that was gathered.
Yep, I think this the link that I have shared is not covering conformance, but entire testing, integration tests, not the unit tests. So it covers more than conformance, but I agree that it doesn't cover the entire breadth. One thing I would say is you would still, if you are exposing an endpoint, you probably should have an E2E test for it for sure. And that, in the link that I just showed is what the link that is shared in the notes is what I'm opening it parallelly, just a sec. Yep, it's not necessarily restricted to conformance. It's actually talking about E2E tests. So this
right. I think there's conflicting guidance, right? Like on the one hand, this is only capturing E2E tests, but on the other hand, there's constant feedback that our E2E tests run too long, and just from a developer perspective, it's a much, much better experience to have an integration test that I can run on a particular package and exercise sort of the exhaustive set of APIs, like every operation on every API in 10 seconds, rather than spinning up a cluster to do a test loop. And so if the statement is, if you have an API, any endpoint, any verb, any method, any field, there must be an E2E test exercising it, that basically explodes the number of E2E tests we have. And that is going against the guidance we were getting from SIG testing and just the practical experience of, I need to fix something, I want a test suite I can run on an API in 10 seconds, not 10 minutes. So I agree there needs to be some set of E2E tests, kind of high level, like, does this object get persisted? Does the happy path, like, do these things work? And there are some things that can only be tested in E2E tests, right? Like upgrade things and end to end, like API to controller to kubelet, back to controller, back to API. Like those sorts of things need E2E tests. But I disagree with the assertion that there must be an E2E test for every combination of endpoint and verb and version and field. So before people take that and just kind of run with it and we see an explosion of E2E tests, it's worth kind of figuring out what our desired direction is there.
Yeah, I think there's going to be an umbrella issue that is gonna cover all these tests. So we should probably voice opinions there. It's, I mean, if it just passes through, I'm sure there'll be E2E tests for each verb and each API endpoint ultimately, if nobody says no. I see that the number of endpoints not being covered here is by that the API Snoop is reporting is not great. And from your perspective, if we are not actually capturing all the data, then there should be something that gives us information on our coverage. If this is incomplete data, then there should be something that tells us exactly what is a complete data. So that is something missing, and probably which I will mention in the comment in there, in that umbrella issue too. That says, okay, how do we use the integration tests and the unit tests, etc. in this. Yep, I think that's all in the agenda right now. If does anybody have any other issue to bring in or any comments on this one? Any updates from KubeCon, Tim? Everyone who attended that should be relevant to this working group.
Yeah, so since we hadn't had a meeting 2 weeks ago, I forgot about that. So I did a basic deep dive kind of describing the general status of where we are to a fairly small audience. It's had a few views additionally on YouTube, but this isn't the sort of thing that draws users out in droves, I feel like, and the conference's growth has been more user focused. So like the discussion we had in Seattle at that KubeCon, where it was more core community members with strong opinions on how we might do this, it was certainly a much more robust discussion. And I think we'll, as we drift towards maybe having proposals in the fall for potential changes, I think that again will drive more folks to show up with pitchforks or maybe celebratory cheers. I don't know. We'll see how that plays out. But I think the cadence of KubeCons has been exhausting, and there were less of the type of folks at KubeCon EU who I think would have been active in the discussion versus earlier adopters at this point. But so yeah, I gave an update. There were a few questions and kind of expected things. Two interesting things I would call out from the discussion and Q&A was, I'm blanking on where they were from, but it's in the recording. Like somebody got up and asked a question and made a few assertions maybe, but I asked them, well, where do you work? You're describing these experiences on supporting your Kubernetes. Where do you work? And they were a little shy to say which vendor distro they were from initially, but then in the audience, Red Hat, SUSE, Canonical all raised their hands and said, hey, we're here too. We got to all figure this out together. It's safe. It's okay. And the person mentioned they're one of the Chinese vendors. But we had a bit of discussion across a number of the vendors, and one of the second thing was that there were a couple of people, 2 or 3 people from Canonical who were there who are interested in being more involved over time on this type of stuff as well. So I haven't seen them show up to our meetings, but I let them know that where the forums exist, where we're discussing this, and that we would welcome them if they're interested in participating.
Thanks, Tim. I should have made notes while you were speaking. Sorry about that.
Oh, I'll drop a link to the recording. I mean, it's a 30-35 minutes or something, so folks who are curious could watch it. But there was no strong actions. We didn't decide how we're going to solve all the world's problems there. So it's, I mean, you could watch it as FYI folks want to.
Any questions for Tim? Okay. So I had a closing perspective that we have reached about 9 months and 6 months of this working group, where I think we had 4 months of official work after we got approved versus 6 months. And it is good to go back and say, okay, let's summarize what this working group's goals were and what should be the deliverables. We already have the survey data back, and what are the how should we structure the action items of this working group? And I think in the next coming meetings, once we look through the survey data and we look at all the different work we have done around understanding how the patch release management works, how the upgrade tests are working, SKU tests, API compatibility, etc. And we probably should narrow down on action items. I have a working doc on that is trying to create a set of metrics or set of indicators that would give us some understanding of what a good proposal or a KEP for, two different proposals from this stable dev and Lubomir's proposal, how to measure them, how to measure a proposal that is proposing how to change the release cadence. So I don't yet have it ready enough to share, but I think this is it's good to point it out that in the future, probably these discussions will channelize us into an list of action items that will give us a good deliverable from this working group. I think the working groups in the past, in other working groups, it has always been discussions, but I think some action items that can be distributed across 6 to get some work done would be great. Any comments from anyone? Okay, I'm going to be optimistic and say everybody likes it and everybody agrees with it and everybody's excited about it. So yeah, I think I'll have some more data next meeting about this, and as meetings go through, I think we'll ultimately, after 2 or 3 meetings, we'll have something concrete. We don't have anything on the agenda, and 13 minutes can be brought back. Calling out for any more topics. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you everyone. Bye-bye. Have a good day.